All right, so we're building a digital fortress today.
Oh,
We are diving deep into building secure software.
yeah.
This document is really going to be our blueprint today.
Okay.
We're talking threat modeling, we're talking risk assessment, we're talking the works when it comes to software.
It's about making that fortress impenetrable, right?
Exactly. No matter how much the attackers want to get in. Now, I know what you might be thinking at home, software security. Isn't that something that the techies need to worry about?
Right.
But this is honestly relevant for everybody.
Yeah.
Because whether you're someone who's prepping for a big tech meeting or you just want to know how your data is staying safe online,
Mm-hmm.
this is the episode for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big deal.
That's a huge deal.
I mean, in today's world, ignoring software security, it's like leaving your front door open.
Yeah, with a
Yeah.
sign that says free stuff, come and get it.
It's a recipe for disaster. We live in a world where everything's interconnected,
Right.
and software vulnerabilities can have ripple effects.
Yeah.
They can impact everything from our personal data
Mm-hmm.
to critical infrastructure.
Absolutely. So let's sort of like set the scene a little bit, lay the foundation.
Yeah.
This document keeps mentioning this whole security development lifecycle, or SDLC.
Right.
It sounds very official, but what are we really talking about here?
Yeah, so you wouldn't, build a car
Okay.
and then bolt the seatbelts on after it's already, speeding down the highway, right?
Right. So we're not talking about an afterthought here.
No. This is about weaving security into every single step of the way
Got it.
when you're creating the software
So it's really that foundation,
from the ground up.
ground up,
Yeah.
baked in, not just sprinkled on top.
Exactly.
I like that.
Yeah.
So instead of having to do all this frantic patching later, you're preventing those vulnerabilities.
Yeah, you're closing those security gaps during the development process itself.
Love it.
You're making the software inherently more resilient from the get-go.
Okay, now that's smart building. Now, this document also mentions this whole software security policy.
Right.
What are we talking about there?
So it's kind of like, setting the ground rules,
Okay.
like a constitution almost for your software.
Okay.
And it lays out, what needs protecting, what are the rules of the game
Right.
that everyone involved needs to follow. And then also, how are you going to achieve that protection?
So it's a playbook.
Yeah.
It's making sure that everybody's on the same page from day one.
Exactly. It's about consistency.
Right.
It's about clarifying expectations.
Right. And it's about preventing those, oh, I didn't realize I wasn't supposed to do that moments,
Exactly.
which, let's face it, they happen.
They do happen.
And those cost money, those cost time, those cause all sorts of headaches.
Big time.
Speaking of teams, this doesn't sound like a solo mission.
No.
It takes a village to build secure software. Who else needs to be in on this?
You're absolutely right. It's a team sport.
Yeah,
You need your developers, of course.
right.
But you also want to have, privacy experts.
Mm,
You want to make sure that you're safeguarding that sensitive data.
right.
You probably want to loop in some legal eagles, make sure you're compliant with all the regulations.
Of course. Yeah,
And your security team needs to be there,
right.
to provide that big picture threat awareness.
So you're really assembling that cybersecurity A-team.
Absolutely.
Everybody's bringing their own expertise to the table.
Yeah, it's fostering that collaborative environment where everybody is aligned on those security goals
I like it.
and understands their role in actually achieving them.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the exciting part, which is getting inside the mind of the attacker.
Getting inside the mind of an attacker.
Yeah,
That's always a scary thought, but we're going to do it.
it is kind of like that, yeah.
So the document mentions threat modeling. What is that? Are we getting into the psychology of a hacker?
It's kind of like a strategy session where we try to think like the bad guys, right?
Okay.
We're trying to map out, what are the potential vulnerabilities in the software?
Right.
And then we're also trying to anticipate how those vulnerabilities might be exploited.
So we're playing a mental game of chess with these folks.
Exactly.
Okay.
Imagine you're looking at your software
Yeah.
through the eyes of somebody who wants to break in.
Right.
What are they going to go after?
Okay.
What are the weaknesses?
Yeah.
What would they target? And then how can we fortify those areas?
So it's all about being proactive.
Proactive.
I like it.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
about mitigating those risks before they even have a chance to become problems.
Love it. But the digital world's a big place.
It is.
There's a lot of crafty people out there, hackers included.
Oh, yeah.
How do we even begin to wrap our minds around all those different kinds of attacks?
So there are frameworks that can help guide us.
Okay.
One that's really common is called STRIDE.
Stride.
It's kind of like a cheat sheet
Okay.
to help us think about all the different tactics that attackers might use.
Stride, another acronym.
It stands for spoofing, tampering, repudiation,
Okay.
information disclosure, denial of service, and elevation of privilege.
Okay, let's break it down.
Okay.
Spoofing, to me, that sounds like something out of a spy movie.
It does.
What are we talking about there?
It's all about impersonation, right? So think like those fake websites that look exactly like the real thing,
Yeah.
and they're designed to trick you into entering your login credential.
Oh.
Or think about like those phishing emails
Yep.
that look like they're from somebody you trust, but they're not.
Right.
And they might contain like malicious links.
So it's all about fooling users and systems
Exactly.
with a convincing disguise.
Yep. And the consequences can be pretty serious, right?
Yeah.
You're talking identity theft,
Mm-hmm.
large-scale data breaches. That's why it's so important to have like really strong authentication measures in place
Right.
and to make sure that we're educating users about these kinds of things.
Makes you think twice about clicking links, that's for sure.
It does.
What about tampering?
Tampering, that's all about unauthorized modification, right?
Okay.
So somebody's intercepting data
Uh-huh.
and they're changing it for malicious purposes.
So, like, if you were to make a bank transaction online and someone was able to get in there and change the account number or something like that.
Exactly. That's a great example.
Wow.
It's like intercepting a message and changing the contents before it reaches the intended recipient.
Okay, so it's really about that data integrity.
Absolutely. And then you've got repudiation,
Okay.
which that one's always a little trickier to explain.
Okay.
Basically, an attacker's trying to cover their tracks
Okay.
so that you can't prove they were behind an action.
Interesting.
It's like they're breaking into a system, but then they're like erasing their digital footprints.
So they're trying to pull off, like, the perfect cybercrime.
Exactly.
They don't want to leave any evidence behind.
And this is where, robust logging and auditing systems are so important
Okay.
because they can help you retrace those steps, even if an attacker tries to cover their tracks.
So it's like having a digital detective's toolkit.
Yes.
Love it. What about information disclosure? Is that as straightforward as it sounds?
It really is unauthorized access to sensitive data.
Okay, so we're talking data breaches here.
Exactly. Think confidential customer information, financial records,
Yeah, the kind of stuff we hear about on the news all the time, unfortunately.
all the time. And that's why encryption is so important.
Right.
Encrypting that sensitive data, both in transit and at rest.
Right.
It's like, you lock up your valuables even if someone breaks into your house.
Right. It's that extra layer of protection.
Exactly.
Okay, so I've got denial of service.
Yes. Denial of service or DOS attacks.
DOS attacks.
They're all about disrupting services,
Okay.
making them unavailable to users.
So like websites crashing, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Think about like online services going offline.
Right, right.
It's a huge deal.
Yeah, because we live in an always-on world. We expect these things to be working.
Exactly.
And when they're not, it's frustrating.
It is.
All right, last but not least, elevation of privilege. That sounds pretty self-explanatory.
It is. Imagine a regular user gaining administrative access
Oh, boy.
to your entire system.
That's not good.
No, suddenly they have the keys to the kingdom.
Yeah.
They can do pretty much whatever they want.
That's a security nightmare.
It is. That's why it's so important to implement what's called the principle of least privilege.
Okay, what's that?
You're only giving users the bare minimum access they need to do their jobs.
Got it. Okay.
So it's like, different security clearance levels.
Right.
You don't want the intern having access to, top secret files.
Exactly. Everybody's got their lane.
Exactly.
So understanding these different stride categories
Right.
really helps us anticipate these potential attacks.
It does.
But how do we take all this and actually apply it to building more secure software? Like, how does this actually translate?
That's where methodologies like PASTA come in.
Pasta. Okay.
Yeah,
I'm sensing a theme here, a little bit of a food theme with all these acronyms.
maybe just a little bit.
So PASTA, what are we talking about there?
So PASTA stands for Process for Attack Simulation and Threat Analysis.
Okay.
It's basically a way to put our threat modeling into action.
Okay. So how does that work?
So, we're not just thinking about threats in the abstract anymore.
Right.
We're actually going to simulate them, and we can see how our defenses hold up.
So it's like running a fire drill for our software.
Exactly.
I like that a lot.
And that way, we can really fine-tune our security posture,
Okay.
make sure that we're as prepared as we can be.
Love it. Love it. Now, you mentioned this idea in the document that not all threats are created equal.
Right.
And that makes sense, right? I mean, it's like saying a paper cut and a heart attack are the same thing.
Exactly.
They're both injuries, but
Very different.
very different levels of severity.
For sure.
So how do we prioritize? How do we know which threats we really need to, throw everything at.
So that's where risk assessment comes in.
Okay.
We need a way to look at all these different threats and figure out
Right.
which ones are the most dangerous.
Okay.
You wouldn't put the same amount of resources into guarding against, like, a shoplifter
Right.
as you would against, like, a bank heist.
Makes sense.
So there are frameworks that can help us do this.
Okay.
One that's really helpful is the DREAD model.
Dread. Break that down for me.
All right, so DREAD stands for damage potential, reproducibility, exploitability,
Oh, okay.
affected users, and discoverability.
Okay. So that's like a 5-point checklist to assess
Yeah.
the severity of a vulnerability.
Exactly. So let's say we uncover a vulnerability in our software.
Okay.
The DREAD model helps us ask the right questions. Like,
Okay.
if this vulnerability is exploited, what's the worst that could happen?
Right.
How easy is it for an attacker to actually do that? How much effort would it take them to pull that off? Who would be impacted? Is it just, a handful of users? Or is it potentially, millions of people?
Right.
And how easy is it for an attacker to actually find this vulnerability in the first place?
Okay, so we're thinking about, like, how much damage could this thing do?
Yes.
How easy is it to pull off?
Yep.
How many people are going to be affected?
Exactly.
Got it.
So we assign scores to each of these factors, and then we can come up with an overall risk score for the vulnerability.
Okay.
High score, all hands on deck, this is a big problem.
Got it.
Low score, maybe we can address it later.
So it's really like a triage system.
Exactly.
Okay.
Helps us figure out where we need to focus our efforts first.
Now, we've been talking about, kind of these general concepts.
Right.
But I know there are certain applications, like web applications, that have their own unique set of vulnerabilities.
For sure.
So what do we need to know about that?
So there's something called the Web Application Security Frame.
Okay.
And it basically provides this, like, specialized toolkit
Okay.
for web developers specifically.
Okay.
And it's going to highlight some of those common vulnerabilities that are specific to web apps.
Got it.
Things like cross-site scripting or SQL injection.
Okay, so it's really giving them the guidance they need to build security in from the ground up.
Exactly. Exactly.
This has been incredible.
It's been fun.
We've covered so much ground today. It's amazing.
We really have.
But I think if there's one thing I'm walking away with, it's that security is not just a one-time thing.
No.
It's not like you set it and forget it.
It's a journey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You got to constantly be vigilant, right?
Yeah. Absolutely, because the threat landscape is always evolving.
Always changing.
So we got to stay one step ahead.
So before we wrap up, any final thoughts for our listeners out there as they continue their own software security journeys?
We've covered a ton of technical stuff today, but don't underestimate the human element.
Oh, that's huge.
Right. Even with the best security in the world, people can still make mistakes.
It's like having the best lock on your door,
Right.
but leaving the key under the mat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So security awareness training, make sure everybody's on board.
Everybody needs to be speaking the same language.
Absolutely. At the end of the day, you're only as strong as your weakest link, right?
Could not agree more. Such a great point. Well, on that note, this has been another deep dive.
It has.
See you next time.